We're looking again at the Gospel Coalition video featuring J.D. Greear, Russell Moore, and Voddie Baucham. They're talking in this video about why they believe that homosexuality is morally wrong, damaging to the society, and shouldn't be supported by the church or legally by the government. So let's go ahead and see what they have to say.
And I think that's an important point. I think people also need to understand two things. One, we say it's not harming anybody. It's me in my bedroom. Well, the current debate about marriage explodes that myth. This is not private. This is pressing upon culture as a whole.
Right off the bat here, I am actually going to agree with Voddie. I do think that this issue is not only private, but that it is also a public issue. The LGBTQ community used to try to stay out of the light of society and keep things to themselves and keep them private. And what happened is that police would go into the places where people were meeting, trying to be out of the public light as much as possible, and they would raid them and they would arrest them, and they would often rape the women that they arrested because, you know, you could make them straight that way, and they would put them in the paper the very next day, and then they would lose their jobs. Oftentimes they would lose custody of their children. You know, their marriages would break apart. They'd lose custody of the ability to even see their kids. So basically their entire lives would be ruined. So yeah, like, we tried that. We tried to be private, and society would not let us do it. So, I mean, that's one reason why it's not private. But the other reason is that marriage was never intended to be a solitary affair between two people. When a marriage happens, this is why people gather traditionally in churches or in courtrooms, places that represent the major institutions of society and their communities. And before God, there's a spirituality there. You know, and so people's family and friends would come and to offer their support for the couple, that they want to help them, because marriage and raising kids can be difficult, and society supports that relationship. And that's kind of the point of the whole thing. And it's also very important because marriage is like the one relationship where everyone's going to understand, even if you're like the president of the United States, if your spouse is in a life-threatening situation, everyone's going to understand if you drop everything to go be with them, no matter who you are. There's not many relationships like that in society, you know, and they're all very close familial relationships based on marriage and based on having kids. So yeah, this is much more than just a private issue. This is an issue of LGBTQ people wanting the same privileges and supports and rights in society that straight and cisgender people have taken for granted and really have just been kind of given without a fight whatsoever. And we think that we deserve to be able to participate in society in a similar way. Yeah, so sometimes that's illegal, sometimes that's immoral. And, you know, I really believe in not just trying to legislate everything, but in moral persuasion, and the fact that this is a good moral thing to do is to support these individuals in this way. So although we take it in a very different direction, yeah, like, we're very much in agreement that this is not just a private thing. So let's see what else he has to say.
This is pressing upon culture as a whole. Mm-hmm. And because they framed it in civil rights language, mm-hmm. it means that this is the greatest farce ever. You can go ahead and practice your religion. This has nothing to do with you practicing your religion. If this is a civil rights issue, and if us not doing weddings for homosexuals or not hiring homosexuals becomes violating civil rights, then it is not conceivable that the church will be unharmed by this. Mm-hmm. So that myth is exploded. This is mm-hmm. not private, this is public.
So Voddie says this issue has been framed as a civil rights issue. And I don't know about you, but to me that makes it sound like he's saying that that was kind of a strategic choice to frame it that way, and that it should not be framed that way. That LGBTQ rights, and specifically the right to marriage, is not a civil rights issue. I want to begin by acknowledging that there is something very real and legitimate that he's responding to here, which is that particularly people of my skin color, white people who are LGBTQ, have sometimes acted like LGBTQ rights are literally the new civil rights issue. Like, we solved all those issues of racism, and now let's move on to the new one. And that is just blatantly naive and really lacking support for a community that is also marginalized and also very much centering whiteness in the conversation. So not everyone who's part of the LGBTQ community is white. And in fact, I am most concerned really with people of color who are LGBTQ. Like, okay, let's talk about whether this is a civil right, the right to get married. There's a lot of things that come along with marriage. And one of them is simply the dignity of having access to an institution that other people have access to. It's just an issue of human dignity, that we're not treated as lesser in the eyes of the law. And that is very important. And there are also other civil rights that come along with marriage that are very important. Things like the right to inherit the property of your spouse, the right to the Social Security of your spouse or pensions or other retirement programs, the right to benefits like health insurance or the having children together and having health insurance for the children. All of these things, just the ability to form a family and participate as a family unit legally and financially are very beneficial. These are actually civil rights. So it's hard to say how can you say this isn't a civil right, because these literally are civil codes that give rights that we're saying these people can't have access to those. So it's hard to see why you would even say these are not civil rights. But, I myself, I've got enough in society. I have enough privilege in society that I'm going to be okay. I've experienced a lot of huge, enormous difficulties and financial setbacks in my life as a result of being queer, a lot. I would say more than most people. But I'm still going to be fine. I am most concerned with people of color who are LGBT, who are impoverished, and these are the people who are absolutely the most vulnerable. And these are people in Voddie's own community. They need these rights and they need these protections just so they can be able to get by. So, so I take major issue with the idea that this is not a civil rights matter. One more thing is he says, if they start talking about employment and marriage, I don't know how that could not affect the church. I do think that this is a bit disingenuous, because let's look at sex. It's illegal to discriminate by sex. If I am a business that's a public business, or a business that operates in the public marketplace, I can't say I'm not going to hire you because you're a woman. You can't do that. You can't be like, I'm a Christian or I'm a whatever religion, and so I only believe in salespeople being men, and so I'm not going to hire women as sales. You cannot do that. And you haven't been able to do that for a long time. But if you're the church, you absolutely can do that. Churches are allowed to discriminate by sex. They're allowed to. You can say, we don't believe that men should be pastors, so we're not going to hire you as a pastor. And these rights have been around for a long time when it comes to gender, and the church still has the ability to discriminate in that way. They absolutely do. And there are aspects of the marriage ceremony that are sacred. And those aspects are protected. I mean, churches get to decide who they want to baptize, do marriage ceremonies for, all this stuff. They get to decide these kinds of things. Now, if you start saying we're federal funding has been taken away for some racial discrimination issues and things like that in schools, and those might be a little bit different, but schools have even been asking for exemption and getting exemptions in order to be able to continue to discriminate against LGBTQ people and take federal funds at the same time. So we're paying into the taxes the same way, but we're not receiving the same benefit as everybody else. And the government has said that's okay. So I think that sometimes these kinds of things are they're scare tactics, because the church has broad freedoms when it comes to exercising their faith, even when that means sexual discrimination and saying we don't hire women here. Like, the church is allowed to do that. So, in what universe do you think that the government's going to start saying you need to start hiring gay pastors or trans teachers? It's really difficult to see that happening in the United States. Like, there would have to be a major overhaul of laws and rules in order for that to happen. So I think generally these kinds of things are just like scare tactics.
So that myth is exploded. This is not private. This is public. The other thing is that all legal decisions are based on principles and established precedent. And right now the principle is, sort of the Beatles mentality. All you need is love. Well, if that's the case,
it's not the principle.
If marriage is based on popular opinion,
the principle is equality under the law, that even minority groups should have equality under the law, and that the government's job is not to discriminate based on sex, based on gender, based on things like that, who does and who does not deserve civil protections. That's the moral principle.
And who loves each other. The 50-year-old man and the 12-year-old boy, the man and his daughter, so on and so forth. And everybody say, oh, red herring. No, not once the principle is established. So this is not private, and it doesn't stop here.
Now I get to talk to you about an organization I absolutely love, Seventh-day Adventist Kinship International. They're especially focused on Adventists, people of Adventist heritage, or who are connected to Adventists and who are either allies or LGBTQ people themselves. They're an affirming organization, and they have meant the world to me. When I was first coming out, it was a really difficult time, and they were absolutely there for me. People from the organization talk to me. I'm a member, which gives me access to all kinds of social media groups. I watch their YouTube channels, the resources on their website. It's a fantastic organization. I suggest you check them out. Link in the show notes. It is incredibly discouraging to me that conservative Christians can't understand why pedophilia is wrong. Or can't see the difference between two adults getting married and pedophilia. Pedophilia is wrong because children are unable to give consent because they are at an age where adults are supposed to be caregivers, not sexually exploiting them. That is why pedophilia is wrong. It's not love. So this is a hateful argument. Like, this is a really hateful argument. I don't use words like that very often, but I don't know how else to say it. Like, this is a choice. This is a choice that he is making to characterize the LGBTQ community in this way. It's not a choice that he has to make. Nobody is making him make it. It doesn't make any sense logically. And if he stopped to think about it, like, he would realize that it doesn't make sense, but it does support the argument he's trying to make, which is that same-sex marriage is morally wrong and awful and evil. But I think it actually supports the other case, which is that those who oppose same-sex marriage end up doing things that are morally awful, like equating gay people to pedophiles, like trying to characterize the LGBTQ community in negative terms as much as they possibly can so that they can not give us the right to marry. So I think he's actually proving the opposite point, that opposing same-sex marriage actually morally compromises the church and makes them less like Jesus.
I think we ought to even challenge the principle that just because something doesn't harm, that takes it out of the realm of morality.
Yeah.
If you cheat on your wife and she never finds out about it and you lie about it, is it wrong? And I think most people would say yes, because lying is inherently wrong.
It's interesting here that JD would bring up lying, because if you've taken an ethics class, you know that one of the classic moral quandaries is around just this subject. The scenario is that it's during the Holocaust and you are hiding Jews in your house, and the Nazis come on your door and they knock and they say, "Are you hiding Jews?" So do you tell the truth because telling the truth is the morally right thing to do, and then those people get killed? Or do you lie and maybe they have a chance of surviving? And I mean, I'm just going to show my cards here and say I'm definitely lying to the Nazis and I'm trying to save people's lives. Like, that's so obvious to me. But the point is that people disagree on this subject. It's not a total settled point that it's always wrong to lie. A ton of people disagree on this, actually. And the exact reason they disagree is because of moral harm. So he's saying morality and harm can be separate, but I actually think that it's a huge problem if we try to start separating those things. And I also think it's unbiblical. Jesus says in Matthew 22, verses 36 to 40, that we should love the Lord our God with all our heart, all our mind, all our strength, and love our neighbors as ourselves. On these two things hangs all the laws and the prophets. Like, this is the whole point of the whole thing. Love is the point of the entire thing. If you start making love some abstract concept that has nothing to do with people's real and actual lives and what's good for them and beneficial for them, you run into problems too. Like, I actually completely disagree and say if you make morals an abstract concept that has nothing to do with what's actually good for real human beings. And now I know it gets so messy in the implementation. And I know that there are principles where you say this, not lying is like a good moral principle. Like, I'm not saying that that's not true, but to take morality outside of the realm of the impact that actions have on people is a big problem. It's a big problem. This is something that can be used to control people. And this is like just perfectionistic behavior, self-flagellation types of behavior. These kinds of things are super problematic, I believe, anyways. Anyway, it's going to be actually super interesting to see what he does next. So first he says morality and harm aren't necessarily connected, but then check out the next move that he makes.
Yeah. And then the other thing is realizing that a lot of times harm does not reveal itself immediately.
Right.
You know, if you are violent towards someone, that's an immediate effect. But
right.
You have to look at the long-term effect of the harm. And for as long as there's been human history, you mentioned this, Voddie, that the sanctuary into which families have been brought forward has been a monogamous relationship between two opposite genders where they learn to love the other, and that is what the Creator called marriage.
If we were to adopt this strategy, society would just have to never change anything. Because what if there's long-term negative effects that we don't see and understand? I mean, thank God the people who first watered the seeds of democracy in this world did not say, you know, historically, we have always been ruled by God-appointed rulers who were given, you know, totalitarian authority over these countries to rule and do what needed to be done. Like, what is going to be the long-term effect of democracy? Like, thank God people didn't say that. I mean, during the abolitionist movement, there were definitely people who were saying, look, this is a God-given institution. This is what humans have always done. It's always been part of our economic system. And if you take this away, the long-term effects of removing slavery from our society are going to be horrible. Like, thank God that abolitionists didn't listen to that. I feel like there's some real injection of fear into this, saying we can't make changes in our society. We can't make progress because what if there's some long-term negative effects to that? And also, did you catch what he's doing? Which is that first he started by saying, you know, ethics, morality, and harm aren't necessarily related. But then he went on to say immediately that this is going to cause harm. So it's just really hard for anyone to ever stay in that place of thinking they're not connected. Anyway, let's see what else he has to say.
You know, the Achilles heel right now of I think of the homosexual, you know, so-called marriage debate is just the utter lack of monogamy. You know, that's something that's not really in that. And so once you start tearing down the otherness of marriage, the sanctuary of monogamy, that lifelong faithfulness into which a family arises, the harmful effect may not be demonstrably immediate, but I think you'll see it. And I think a lot of surveys start to bear that out.
JD, you may not be aware of this, but what the surveys are bearing out is that the more LGBTQ people get civil access to marriage and more support within their communities, the more interested they are in monogamy. I always find this argument interesting for so many different reasons. Individuals make individual choices. There are LGBTQ people who are monogamous. And he might not know this, but there's actually heterosexuals who aren't. A few of them. Almost all. Yeah, I don't know. It's hard. Okay. I'm so torn by this because part of me just feels like this is just like almost offensive, but then part of me is like, this is almost hilarious. Okay, clearly JD is very interested in monogamy and in all people being monogamous. Given the reality that gay people exist, does he think that monogamy is going to be best facilitated by the church and society supporting them in marriage like they have not before? Does he think that that's helpful for churches and society to support people in marriage? And what does he think the impact has been that has not happened? But what's the most helpful thing? Is it going to be for gay people to be supported in marriage or to demand that gay people are celibate? It's such a strange argument to say this group of people, they're not so good at monogamy, but they're going to be great at celibacy. Like, you're not going to be able to make us go away. We exist. So what's your solution, dude? I don't know. I don't know. I find this humorous, quite frankly. Yeah. So, there's a lot of things that we could do to build up monogamy if that is your goal. So support people who want monogamy. The more rights LGBTQ people get, the more LGBTQ people are monogamous. If you want to decrease divorce rates, like, you should address things like poverty, income inequality. There's all kinds of issues that need to be addressed that are really underlying marriage and supporting monogamy. Going after the LGBT community is probably not going to make society more monogamous. I mean, sometimes I just feel like certain cisgender heterosexual Christians just want to blame their problems on us. We're living in the world y'all created. It's not our fault if you're not monogamous. Oh my. Yeah. Anyway, on that note, thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope you really enjoy it. Please, it really helps. It means the world to me if you like this channel and if you subscribe. And remember that God loves you, and God's love for you is not dependent on you getting all the right answers or doing all the right things. Trust God and know that God loves you and cares about you, and everything's going to be all right. Okay, talk to you later, loved one.